Okay.
Welcome everybody as you're joining.
Welcome, welcome. Awesome. So for the sake of time, we are going to start our session today. Before I start, I just want to remind everyone that this session is recorded. The recording of the session will be made available on the African American Employee Resource Group SharePoint site, along with our speaker's full bio, just so that you will know in the event that you want to go back and check it out. I've also added the link in the chat space to register for future sessions. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the closing. We do have Rick Mills on. He's the secretary of the African American Employee Resource Group, and he will be monitoring the chat space and admitting all of our participants. And our co-chair, Dondanita Fleury Simmons, is on also. So if there's some direct questions that you have for our resource group leaders, please feel free to connect with them. Otherwise, we're going to get started. So welcome again. I am Danielle Hairston-Green. I'm the Institute Director for Human Development and Relationships. I'm also the chairperson for the African American Employee Resource Group and District 530 representative for the Academic Staff Council with UW-Madison. I want to thank you on behalf of the resource group for sharing your lunch hour with us. We are affectionately known as AAERG. As we kick off our inaugural Black Voices Matter discussion series in recognition of Black History Month. The AAERG purpose is to serve as a resource for and foster the success of current and future African American colleagues by sponsoring programming, providing collegial support, encouraging belonging, and raising a collective voice related to issues that impact employees' ability to thrive personally and professionally. It is my absolute honor to introduce our very first speaker for our discussion series today. She is one of those individuals that makes me proud to say, I know people. Her full bio is impeccable and will be, as I mentioned earlier, available for your viewing on our SharePoint site. But I do want to spend a quick moment to highlight some amazing things about her. Shoshone Dial is a self-identified proud Army brat. She was born in Germany. She attended her first 2 years of high school in Seoul, Korea, and studied for 6 months at St. Peter's College in Oxford, England. She was nicknamed the Voice, and you'll see why when she begins to speak, by the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania poetry scene. She is an award-winning radio broadcaster, author, edutaining facilitator, engaging mistress of ceremonies, polished plenary moderator, and an unapologetic advocate. Shoshone is also the founder of Boisterous Media, LLC, which provides consulting services via public speaking, professional development, and voiceover services. Boisterous Media believes there are no quick solutions to an organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion growth, wherever individuals and the organization are on the spectrum. Solutions are multi-layered and require the investment of resources continuously. Boisterous Media is a LGBT business enterprise, certified business by the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. She is also the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of Stevens College, her alma mater, and the second oldest women's college in the country, as well as one of 32 remaining women's colleges in the country. Shoshone is the author of 2 books, Acquired Taste of Love, Spice-Filled Poems to Please Your Palate, and Estrogen in the Atmosphere. Additionally, and one of my absolute favorites is her spoken word CD titled Voicemail. I actually still have a signed copy from 10 years ago. She is currently pursuing her PhD in Administration and Leadership Studies at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Shoshone is on a mission to connect people to people and people to information by taking her lived experience to a public platform, practicing the art of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, especially when defensiveness and awkwardness show up. Shoshone creates brave environments for you to document your own lived experiences and on your own life narrative. Without further ado, I present to you Ms. Shashawn Dial as she will engage you in a discussion entitled Beautifully Queer, Black Experiences in the Workplace.
Thank you, Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green. And welcome. So let's rock and roll. I am good for you like a daily vitamin. I am releasing for your system like a detoxing probiotic. I am that student who was excused from afternoon elementary class to attend speech class down the hall and practice the pronunciations of S's and C's, Z's and CH's with a name like Shashawn. I'm the one called Chubbo on the playground during recess, despite I was always picked first for soccer and kickball. Few knew that I was straight out of my 4'11" mother's womb with banana feet, and I wore hip cast until I was 18 months of age. I am the defiance to middle school report cards that always marked me excellent in intelligence. However, I caught whoopings from the colonel because the comment section always listed, "She needs to not be so social. She needs to adopt an inside voice, even when she's outside." I'm the one they call brown nose or teacher's pet for always sitting in the front row of class. But few knew that this nose bled horrifically due to allergies to everything, sending me to too many Army-based ERs, too many mornings and evenings to count. And yes, I was the butt of jokes from the cool kid Clit about the proper way I spoke. I turned into an observation active listener with ears that survived chronic infections from birth through college nursing stations. So all of that has made me today an eyes open, bold risk taker, accepting the positive and often negative consequences. My pronouns are she and her. I am a queer, cisgender, able-bodied, WOMXN, spelled that way, not for any hatred of men, but to remind myself daily that I don't only have to define myself by my relationships to men. I'm a natural hair rocker of 24 years, a proud Army brat, 13 moves before the age of 25, a former resident of Harrisburg, PA for 20 years, a growing entrepreneur. I like to think I'm complex, like a good home-cooked meal. On my best days, I'm creative, hypnotic as the snare drum, gifted Nubian. And I try to be for myself, not against myself. I'm a 2010 spoken word CD creator, a 2014 double book releaser. But the greatest compliment is that 4'11" ball head rockin' mama said that I have $1 billion organic smile. I'm fun-sized at 5'3" and give me my damn 3/4. I'm a brown sugar in the raw poetess, a May 27th type of Gemini, a clearance sale year-round shopper. I'm a thick, pleasantly plump, pretty lady with fluff, says my 3 Black magic goddaughters who are 21, 9, and 6. I am Alto Sunshine. I am 10 times tatted, yep, designing the 11th piece right now. I am bittersweet like balsamic vinaigrette, a 90s R&B purist who cannot sing or hum. You'd all be in a hospital with bloody ears. I'm an occasional DIY upcycler, a multi-identity space and people connector. I'm a code switcher by force, not by choice. I'm a law of attraction practitioner and a multi-sensory educator and consultant. I'm a dialogue facilitator, unapologetically in pursuit of equity, not necessarily equality, for the most targeted, marginalized, neglected, ignored, and abused. I'm always that one, like most of y'all, who always did more than what the job description required, whether it was human social services, broadcast radio, community college, higher education, government, or running my own micro business. I'm a survivor of structural violence, not once, but twice, 2 push-outs, like too commonly experienced by Indigenous Black and Brown women at the hands of grown professional bullies who were not pleased that I had the audacity to not stay in the box that they put me in. I am over consistently navigating single identity spaces. I'm over suppressing and compromising, navigating my multiple identities, especially the ones that are made vulnerable by US institutions. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality. I am doing my best to remember that I'm running no one else's race, just my own. I'm a seeker of the universal presence and art, ritual, and nature. I'm a rape survivor who's anything but silent, and I am rebellious to the limitations placed upon me yesterday or today. Because I'm vulnerable enough to tell y'all that I battle daily the parts of me that long to heal and the parts that are content to remain broken. I'm struggling to break the cycle of finding celebration and comfort in foods. I loathe high fructose corn syrup. So I'm a survivor warrior, my mantra and both, because the binary is easy. Black, white, tall, short, straight, gay, it's limiting. And my personal choices don't always, you fill in the blank. There are always other systems, institutions, and people at play. So I have chosen to dismantle the isms. And I pose today, have you made that choice? Because you and I did not create the isms. We did inherit them though. And so therefore, we have to do our individual, communal, and organizational work to dismantle them, or else we are complicit in their continuation. So let's be on a journey towards liberation together. Because just in case you're now starting to catch on, you're looking and listening to one of the Most High's creation, a descendant of the African diaspora, of kings and queens and villages. Yes, also in the US context, a descendant of slaves. Either way, they were makers, doers, creators, thinkers, the legs of the table that we continue to get asked to be at. So I'm grateful for the energies, the spirits, and those who trailblazed before me, the ancestors who stood in line for, cried for, died for, bled for, hid for me, the ones who resisted, the ones who told stories, the ones who made herstory, history, and their story. So if nobody told you today in the hours so far on this third day of February, it is my honor to tell you that each of you is a masterpiece. Yes, a masterpiece in evolution. A one-of-a-kind creation, never to be duplicated. You were put on this earth to do the most remarkable things, no matter what happens. And you were given a unique cocktail, a gift of talents. Have you identified them, and are you using them to make each space you grace more accessible for all? So yeah, I'm a women's college graduate, a Stevens College star in Columbia, Missouri. I'm also a Shippensburg University Raider, Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, where ship happens. I am a heavy-hipped Kansas State University Wildcat, and I'm a current IUP Crimson Hawk, an aspiring applied sociologist. And I'm blessed with a circle of friends that I call family. I've been partnered the last 3.5 years, despite having 20 years of herstory, with Tuffy Howard, an amazing masculine presenting woman who played semi-professional women's full contact, not the lingerie league, the full contact league, for 12 years. And so proud to witness her journey daily as she uses her talents to love on and provide structure for some of our most broken and challenged children. She's doing her part to keep them out of the mass incarceration complex. So I am a herstory maker, the inaugural co-vice chair of Governor Tom Wolf's Commission on LGBT Affairs, the first commission of its kind in the country. Yep, the inaugural director of diversity, equity, and inclusion with Stevens College, founder, Boisterous Media, LLC. I get it, I'm totally overwhelming and too much for some, but that's okay. Because at the end of the day, I am Mary and Eugene Koopa's great-granddaughter. I am Zaralee, Leona, and Kermit's granddaughter. I am Joyce and Cortez's firstborn. I am Nathan, the Air Force pilot, one of 250 Black pilots out of 12,500 pilots in the entire Air Force. I am his big sister, and today is his birthday. I am Nate's godmom and Layla's godmom and Trinity's godmom and Jordan's godmom. I am the capital city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They did name me the voice. I like to think I'm a dial movement all by myself. So my name is not Shoshana, Sean, Shawan, Sasquatch, or according to spell check, Shawshank. My mother named me Shoshan, and so I am. So hello, good people. Thank you for prioritizing your time to be here today and to be open for this exchange of information and thoughts and observations. I definitely want to, I'm going to share my screen, We're going to celebrate being beautifully queer, right? And so there's a little collage of all the goodness that I shared with you. And what's the method behind the madness? Can all of you show up in your workplace? That's the aspiring goal, I think, when we talk about the intersections of race and age and class and sexual orientation and gender identity and ability and disability. Can you show up at the workplace with minimal barriers and obstacles? So some of the people, some of the accomplishments are there in visual form. Gratitude, asante, thank you to the Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green. I call her Queen, Dr. Queen, whenever we get to touch base. I appreciate you, all of your accomplishments, your trailblazing. As we talk about a lot, you were one of the first that I could touch who went and got the terminal degree. And I sat in my living room and took pictures of you on my TV crossing the stage. And so thank you for always being supportive and encouraging me to go pursue this terminal degree. So thank you. I also want to do a shout out to Dr. Warren R. Anderson, who is serving as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the entire Wisconsin system. We have connections, just like Dr. Danielle, going all the way back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I want to congratulate him on his new role and also just to encourage you all to work with that king and that brother because he's amazing. I want to thank all of you who are part of, supporting. May you have the lived experience or you're an aspiring ally to the AAERG group. So thank you for creating time and space to be able to do this. And of course, thank you to the Herstory, history, their story, them story makers. They are our guides, our spirits, our energies. Some of them, I encourage you, if these names aren't familiar, Google it. Lucy Hicks Anderson, Georgia Black, Carlette Brown, Annie Lee Grant, Ava Betty Brown, Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy Laverne, Miss Major, Kyler Brodus, Kai Allums, Brian Michael Smith. And let me pause, because just up the road from you all, well, not up the road, but Milwaukee, do you know these folks? Donna Burkett and Manonia Evans, Richard Bracefield and Elizabeth Brown, all LGBTQ Black Herstory, history, their story makers. The first lesbian couple to attempt to get a marriage license, an amazing choreographer, and an amazing jewelry designer. So do you know the history, herstory, their story of our LGBTQ plus trailblazers? If not, that's always a good place to start. Just like we bless the land, knowing that it came from our indigenous and native kin. We come to this space hopefully to learn, relearn, reclaim, reframe, witness lived experience, challenge narratives that we've had to digest, and increase our awareness of the cognitive. I also hope that you will breathe, releasing toxins, bringing in oxygen, and just connecting the head to the heart. So thank you. Oh, and by the way, it is February. It is Black History Month. So extra special kudos, right, to all those of African descent and those who are Black, African-American, Nubians, kings, queens, non-binary, pals, gender conforming, trailblazers, hello. So let's see if we can do this. 2 poll questions for you. So the first one asks you, what percentage of LGBTQ people, and I may want to stop sharing because I know how technology. So what percentage of LGBTQ people of color say that they have personally experienced discrimination because of their gender identity when applying for jobs? What do you think that percentage is? Ooh, so I see, 95, 100. I see it coming up in the chat. Very high, very high. Right. I'm along with you. That is what I thought as well. In this particular study from the Robert Woods Foundation, 32% of respondents in that particular study said that. But when you think about it, some people aren't going to say that they've experienced it because they know they can't prove it. right? So any statistic is going to be underreported, right? But here's the interesting part in this particular study was that 32% of folks of color said it, 13% of white individuals who identify as LGBTQ thought, right? So almost double or a little over double, right? Awesome. So then here's a second poll question. Only 12% of respondents in a study said, of transgender identifying respondents said that all of their identity documents had matched. So 12% of transgender respondents said all of their identity documents matched, right? Their name and their gender. What percentage reported that none of their identity documents match their gender identity? So what do you think that percentage is of folks who say, nope, none of my IDs have the name and the gender that is me? 80, 88. Lots of overachievers. I like this group. So it's 62%. So why is that important? Any of you who are in any part of the recruitment, selection, hiring part of the employment process need to know that only 12% of specifically trans folks have all of their documents matching. So just from the gate, we have to think about the obstacles and the barriers that folks are experiencing before they even have the job. And that study continued to show that the number one cited barrier was cost, right? The cost to change all those things. And if any of you have ever done a name change through marriage, divorce, separation, I experienced that. It was probably 2 to 3 days of calling off work or strategically using my lunch hour to try to go and sit at the Social Security office. And remember, I lived in the capital city. So it was only 5 to 10 miles. But if you don't live in your capital city or there's not a DMV or something near you, how do you get there? And let's think if the barriers are transportation, childcare, and then monetary pieces, right? So just want to give you a little bit of context there of some statistics, especially for my very, very talented quant researchers and folks in higher ed. So here's another little bit of context, right? For my visual learners, I identify as one, is anytime we're talking about race, right? We're talking about Black experiences, LGBTQ plus in the workplace. We want to give some context to that. So we want to talk about internalized, interpersonal, institutional, systemic. This is a tool. Of course, you can go top down, bottom up, but I've also layered it with some of these things that specifically speak to Black experiences in the workplace, right? So if we look at internalized, going down, up, we have to think that Black LGBT folks often are dealing with this piece that we've been told our sexual orientation or our gender identity is a white perversion. It is something not native to our ancestors, and that, this construction or these constructions of race or gender are only westernized. So we're fighting that. We're fighting safety needs, whether that's physical, mental, spiritual safety needs, right? I think most of us probably know there is an epidemic of violence against Black trans women. If we go to interpersonal, we think about how individuals interact with other communities. There's just a lack of documented narratives. It is the pull that's making me pursue a terminal degree, right? And I'm documenting the narratives of the workplace of transgender folks of color, strictly because I don't know what I don't know as a cisgender person. And I don't even know how trans folks perceive recruitment, hiring, selection, promotion, termination, discipline. So why not ask them, right? We have to think about whitewashing or single identity oppression lens, right? We deal with this all the time in our large LGBT movements. They're often white, cisgender, male led. And so the single identity oppression often is just sexual orientation. Well, that's not true. For Black folks, it's race, and it could be gender identity and sexual orientation, right? We have to think about in institutions and organizations, hypervisibility and invisibility. So I might be the only one or one of a few, and that has a set of challenges. But then again, because I'm the only one or one of a few, then there's extra emphasis, spotlight put upon what I do and don't do, what I say and don't say. We've all experienced this most likely. Can you speak for the entire population, right? Or what I do then reflects. So if I refer somebody to the organization and they end up being a disaster hire, now everyone says, oh, Shashawn's referrals aren't good. But we don't do that necessarily to white folks or non-LGBT folks. We just say, oh, well, we still appreciate you making a referral. They just didn't work out. So why do the folks in the disadvantaged group or the smaller in number group have more pressure? We got to think about the school to prison pipeline, right? The intersection of race. We also have to think about unwarranted background checks as a barrier for employment. And then when we're huge 50,000 level foot in the airplane, we are talking about managing systems that were not built for us in the beginning, right? We're talking about power. So there's the formula from the United Nations, oppression equals prejudice plus the misuse of systemic institutional power. And we're talking about racism and lookism and sexism and transphobia and heterosexism as just a few that one individual could be battling. And then they have to battle that through all of the US social institutions that we need to navigate: government, medicine, finance, banking, religion, media, education, and legal. A little more context, right, is of course the difference between diversity, equality, and equity. And this information comes from research by Ben Simon, a beautiful foundational document called The 5 Areas of Designing Equity, right? And making it clear that diversity would be our characteristics, identities, labels, okay? Sex, disability, age, race, etc. Equality, we just treat everybody the same. Go back to Oprah Winfrey days, everybody gets a car. It looked amazing. It was a heck of a marketing ploy for the automobile companies. It was a heck of a marketing tool for her show. It also assumed, in this context, neutrality, color blindness. It denied the fact that everybody's finances were different who received the car, right? Because what most people didn't know is, yes, you got a brand new car, but you still had to go pay taxes, state taxes on that car. And so to some, they got a brand new car for a couple grand. For some, that couple grand could have been the equivalent of trying to buy a brand new car. So equity accounts for the differences in individual and group attributes. And it absolutely is color conscious because it says we know those US social institutions legislated discrimination. It picked the cool kid clique who was in it and who wasn't in it, right? And so because of that, we want to do is question the patterns of that historical exclusion, knowing that they impact today. So what does this look like in 2021? I love this. You can, and again, I created the graphic, but the content comes from the groundwater approach. Hopefully many of you have been exposed to the article. If you haven't, prioritize some time today and do it. And I love this. Every system has racial inequality, but they use a different term for it. So those of you in experience with child welfare, they call it what? Racial inequity, disproportionality. In healthcare, it's called health disparities. In education, it's the achievement gap. In criminal justice, it's desperate sentencing or disproportionate minority contact. In economic development, it's the underutilization of minority business enterprises, right? But here's the deal. Regardless of all the different language for the manifestations of it, what is it? It's structural racism. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we need to set that context when we go into specifically talking about LGBT people of color and our experiences in the workplace. So a little more data is that a 2010 census showed that we were more likely to be raising children than white LGBT people. And specifically, brown lesbians raising the most number of children. And also within LGBT demographics tend to make the least amount of money. So you got groups of folks doing the hardest job, i.e. and most expensive, which is rearing human beings, and they make the least amount of money. And that's even when coupled, right? 20 to 40%, it's definitely hanging around the 40% right now. But 40% of homeless youth in the US identify as LGBTQ, right? And the research is showing that African-American, Native American young people are overrepresented among those LGBT homeless youth, right? LGBT people of color have higher rates of unemployment compared to the larger LGBT population. And those rates, of course, go up for specifically transgender people of color. And research shows that particularly LGBT people are at much higher risk of poverty, Black LGBT people, than LGBT people, right? So that just means for the percentage of the populations that we comprise, we are over-indexing of homelessness, of unemployment, and it just continues, right? So one of the things I want to pose to you all is like, well, what do we do about all that, Shashawn? Like that is incredibly intense and a lot, and you're talking about systems and what do we do? So one of my suggestions to you, and I call them takeaways, nuggets, gifts, whatever language resonates with you, is I want you to think about where's Wisconsin in the quilt of protections when it comes to local ordinances and state human relations act and federal Supreme Court cases. We gotta think that specifically Black LGBT folks in the big umbrella, we are navigating being safe somewhere. So I might work in a place that has a local ordinance in place that gives me protections, and then I drive or walk or bicycle to my home and I'm not protected there, right? So what is it? So Wisconsin, you'll see in the middle, is Wisconsin explicitly prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation only, not gender identity, okay? And so you can get this information from the Movement Advancement Project, phenomenal resource. You can click on states and you can go in and they rate the states based on adoption, access to healthcare, name changes, how easy or difficult the state makes that. So I always challenge people when you move somewhere or someone is new and coming in, and this is an employee resource group, so you're welcoming someone into your organization, are you comfortable enough to just name that it is what it is, that the Indigenous Native American, this is Wisconsin, Madison, is 0.5%. It's 78.6% white. It's 7% Black or African American, 9% Asian. Are you comfortable enough to just say that's a whole hell of a lot of whiteness? And that as a Black person moving in there, that's a way you can be an aspiring ally. You can make sure I'm getting connected to other folks, whether it's in the job title I do or a different job title. When I look this up, the interesting part is I'm in Columbia, Missouri right now, and very similar numbers. I think it's Columbia 75% white, 9% African American. So I challenge people all the time to really try to feel, not think, but feel, what's that like? I'm in Walmart trying to figure out where the other brown folks are, right? Or where are other gatherings of LGBT? Where is the community showing up? What are friendly restaurants? What aren't friendly restaurants? So that is a tip. That's a way that you can work on aspiring allyship. My second question, how well does the University of Wisconsin system embrace queerness, and make a more color, more pride first impression? So of course, that's everything from forms, that's images, that's alphabet soups. And I say that plural, meaning, right? The first slide had LGBTQIAAPPDS-2+. Oh, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, agender. It could be aromantic. Some people put the A for ally. It can be pansexual, polyamorous. It can be demisexual, dual spirit plus. Just a few. Hang around some LGBT youth and they'll challenge you to add 5 more letters quickly. I choose to use the alphabet soup because it always solicits questions. And so it's the entry point for me to engage. But here's the deal. In the large alphabet soup, often you don't hear things like SGL, same gender loving, which is very common in Black communities and Latin communities and communities of color, right? You might see MSM, men who sleep with men, right? That's a categorization based on behavior because we know for cultural or religious or political or geographic reasons, there are some men who sleep with men or even women who sleep with women, but they're never going to wrap their arms around gay or bisexual. They're just not. And so knowing that even in the alphabet soups, there's cultural lenses within it. What about your marketing, recruitment, selection, hiring? Are you showing different gender expressions? Whether that's perceived as a feminine male or a masculine woman, but where do people see this piece of sex, gender identity, gender expression, right? Because they all are the intersections of age, race, class, and ability. So I identify as queer. I am always conscious that when I go into rooms, that especially if I'm in a room of folks who are more seasoned than me, that can be very offensive to them because that word may have been used on them. My personal experience was that I did not, but I also get the irony of it because I'm a no N-word zone person. Please don't use it around me because that has been used against me. Right? So I get that I can self-identify one way as queer because it's more accurate for my breadth of dating and sexual and sensual and intimate experiences. I also understand that depending on certain rooms I'm in, I may get deer in the headlights. Like, why does she keep calling herself queer? Or I may get people who I see them tense up because of what it does. So this thing is complex. It's anything but simple, right? Are you connecting new employees to the resources around them, right? So is there an LGBT community center? Can you connect them to, LGBT networking and happy hours, right? Is there a little one-sheeter for that? Now, it's up to, you can present it to the person. Whether they choose to do it or not, it's up to them. But what is in your welcome basket for folks? And always thinking about degrees of outness. I just had this experience at the end of our fall term that there was an employee extremely out in the interview process, was hired, extremely out. I'm very out. I mean, you Google me, you can't outrun it, right? So I've been out for 20 some years. And I had actually forgotten on one level what a privilege that is, though I went through struggle to get there, but it's still a privilege that I'm just out to everybody at all times. And this employee came, connected to me, talked about spouse and raising children and all kinds of things. And somehow a different employee ran to that employee and was like, oh, I heard you're out, da, da, da. And that employee was like, wait, hold up. Yeah, I'm out to colleagues, but I don't want to be out to students because their former profession, it was a security issue. They didn't want their constituents or their clients to know, right, that they were LGBTQ because they wanted to protect their spouse and their children. So it was this aha moment again for me of like, you have to consistently check your privileges and know that there are degrees of outness. Some people are out at work, not out at home to friends, blood family, families of choice, but they're not out in the workplace. Maybe they have a really long commute. They're out in one community, not out in another community, right? And then what are our pathways to leadership? How are you sponsoring folks? Mentoring, I get it. I'm leaning more towards sponsorship, meaning how are you intentionally creating opportunities for folks to shine? For folks to be able to get a project or an initiative that when they knock it out the box, now a larger constituency knows who they are. And especially in our COVID days, thinking about folks who could be in remote places like libraries, right, with limited access, or counseling services or something, or even physically in your different plants, who's the furthest on the edges of campus? How can you create opportunities where they shine in front of their colleagues, where senior leadership teams now put a name with a face and a skill set? That is how folks get promoted within organizations, right? So thinking about that. And then who's there? Do you have masculine presenting women leading? right? I am, present feminine in the world. I get my power from pencil skirts and wedge heels and all that good stuff. But I also know that that's a privilege. And because I partner with masculine presenting women, I am a champion for everything can't be lipstick and red bottoms, right? Because my partner is a heck of a leader and I couldn't pay her to put on some lipstick and red bottoms. She is strikingly handsome in a 2 or 3 piece suit and some cuff pants and a button up or whatever it is. So how are we actually walking the walk and talking the talk? So there's a couple of resources there. NBJC is the largest advocating group, so the National Black Justice Coalition, Human Relations Commission, HRC, gets a lot of love and they should, but NBJC is unapologetic about Black LGBT folks and Latin folks, right? And then there's a resource there from GLAD that talks about Communities of African Descent Toolkit. Third question, right? Who is advantaged? Who's disadvantaged? Who's groomed? Who's invisible? Who's celebrated? Who's disciplined harshly? These are all synonyms and different ways of thinking of majority and minority. I took those things out my vocabulary a good 5-6 years ago because I had drank the Kool-Aid that I was a minority in the US context. But the truth is, I am of the majority when you talk about brown people globally, right? Totally different. One, I felt trapped. The other one freed me. So I don't say majority, I say who is advantaged, who is groomed, who is visible, who is celebrated, who is brought behind closed doors and given information, who is given second, third, fourth chances, right? That's the advantage. Just like the disadvantage is who's invisible, who's disciplined harshly, who is seen as rebellious or not liking authority. That to me resonates more, especially in work contexts, right? Of organizations, of like, how do we have work to do with our policies, our procedures, our protocol, and our personnel? Okay. So we talked a little bit about the isms, right? And just knowing that if we aren't facilitating against them, we're complicit. So I walked into this particular role at Stevens College, and lots of people take for granted that it's a women's college. So it must be very LGBT friendly. It must be very, lesbian friendly and da-da-da-da-da. But the default, the autopilot is that heterosexism is in operation. So the campus was not as friendly as it could be because the default was there. We have to apply just as much pressure to train everybody or create facilitation experiences for everybody and openly talk about and have people in leadership positions, right, who are same sex or same gender loving in order for that field to actually be there. We have to have an up and running LGBT student org, or else the students look around and they don't see the absence as neutral. They see the absence of something as negative or against, right? And of course, anytime we're talking about LGBTQ, especially Black folks, we are talking about the difference between sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, attraction, and behaviors. All different spectrums that are running parallel. That right there is mind-blowing for tons of folks. In my lived experience, it's super mind-blowing for Black folks. Because we like the binary, that is simple. Boy, doctors, pull, boy, girl, assignment, and that should dictate everything else in your life. How you show up in the world, who you go to bed with, who you marry, who you have kids with, etc. But again, like my opening piece, the binary is super simple. So what are we doing to continuously teach, facilitate on, show that? So you have a worksheet that was emailed to you earlier that I want to encourage you to start now. You can finish later, right? But I kind of want to walk you through it. So you should have it. I don't think I put it in here, but just think of, hopefully the exercise, if you haven't already, will help you think through it of the different complicated layers. So the first part talks about sex, right? That's our biological package. Chromosomes, genitalia, that's what the doctors looked when you came out of a womb or a stomach, right? And they made a determination. But as you'll see, right, it's kind of a spectrum. The ends tend to be female and male. But what about our intersex folks? Unless something is challenged with an infant, they don't do any internal analysis of what's there, right? So thinking about this spectrum, 26 different identified chromosome configurations for intersex folk. And intersex is just as common as having red hair, right? So are we open with that? Are we naming that? So where are you on there? You circle your little dots of where you believe you are on the spectrum today. Gender identity, what you know yourself to be in your brain, right? So that can be man, woman, that can be non-gender conforming, non-binary, right? The 2015 transgender survey from the National Transgender Coalition, that 500 write-ins for that question of how do you identify your gender identity? Okay, so do I expect you to memorize the 500? Heck no, because I can tell you here, I'm not going to prioritize my time with that. But the fact that I know that folks are creating language and embracing language to try to capture their lived experience is a beautiful thing. I also know that it's completely overwhelming for a lot of people, right? So then gender expression, how do you show up in the world, right? And that could be haircut, makeup, voice. I've come to embrace this alto voice. It was challenging when I was younger, right? But if you think about it, in broadcast communications, a lot of women have raspy, deep, amazing voices. So it's something that in one context, oh, you're weird, strange. And another one, you can make some coin, right? So how do you show up in the world? Where do you get your power from? Where are you comfortable? Where do you feel the most sexy, attractive, and seen? Then you've got your sexual orientation. And some folks, like I've made a worksheet before where you separate these out. You can do one spectrum of who you're attracted to, and then you can do another spectrum of who you actually go to bed with, who you're intimate with, because those don't always have to be the same two things. I tell people my barber, he's 6'2", he is beautiful. I am attracted to him every time he would cut my hair. We would flirt, love it. I'm not going to bed with him. But I very much could be honest and say I'm attracted to him, right? So I could say I'm attracted to men, women, pansexuals, however folks show up and are in the world, hearts, not parts. But who am I going to bed with? Folks who identify with as women, right? So where are you on there? Who are you attracted to, right? And then there's this line of sexual behaviors that people be like, well, why is that its own line? Isn't that who you go to bed with? Not necessarily, because we have to think about, again, sub-communities of sub-communities. So behaviors could be voyeur communities, swinger communities, right? Specifically in LGBT, bears. It could be the leathers, right? It can be BDSM, right? So other intimate communities. And again, this is a place where culture comes in, men who sleep with men. If the HIV/AIDS movement had only stuck with LGBT, the large alphabet, we would not have been able to make the strides in preventive and education as we did when we went to MSM. Because certain people aren't going to pick up that flyer that says LGBT, because they're like, that ain't me. But if I just go by behaviors or certain things, touching, intimate, is there intercourse in this way, then somebody may pick up that flyer and now they read about PrEP, right? So this is where language has a big part of it. So map yourself, because here's my truth to you. If you can't do this, if you can't get comfortable with this, you are not the aspiring ally that you think you are. And remember, when I'm saying ally, it's not just non-LGBTQ folks to LGBT folks, it's intra-community. So it's me being an ally for my bi folk, for my pan folk, for my G folk, for my dual spirit folk, for my polyamorous folk, right? I got a whole lot of aspiring allyship to do to touch to each one of them, right? So, but if I can't get comfortable in knowing who I am, I cannot be a good ally to them. Okay. And also, what are you doing? Keynote speakers, facilitation experiences, Black prides, not just, most cities have a pride and then there's often a Black pride. Why is that? because the main pride was lily white. You didn't see yourself. You didn't see yourself in the vendors. You didn't see yourself in the performers, be that drag queens, drag kings. So then folks went off and started creating Black prides. So do you know if both of those are existing in the cities where you reside and work, right? And then of course, Herstory History, Their Story months, right? You've got the Pride months, you've got October is LGBTQ History Month. And what are you doing specifically to go find the Black folks, right? I just was doing some research and I know Althea, of course, her last name's missing me. She's truly the first trans person in Massachusetts elected to the House of Rep, but you can miss that in articles because they'll say it's Danica who was elected in Virginia because she's the first openly out. And Althea was not out. She was outed in 1992 once she was elected, right? So some of those are slicing and dicing. When are we going back to showcase the Black folks who were the trailblazers and the first? So my fourth question is, are you showing up? Are you showing us the money and both? Be that wages, salaries, benefit packages, moving expenses. If you will court a white person to come into our organization, are you courting the brown people too? If you know that they say, oh, in the negotiation, I got to think about my spouse, my partner, are you asking questions like, well, what do they do? What are their professions? Oh, maybe we'll get some research and see, what possibilities. Are you doing that for the same sex couples, just like you are the opposite sex loving couples? Right? What's the professional development being offered? Can they go to Creating Change, the largest LGBTQ conference in the world that happens every January? Are you offering transgender affirming healthcare? That language is specific. You can get it from the Human Relations Commission. It's updated every year, but if it does not, if your plans do not absolutely say transgender affirming healthcare, then there's probably a barrier for those folks. And that specific language is important because it's hormone replacement therapies, it's surgeries, and it's behavioral services, i.e. counseling, right? How are people medically, socially, and legally transitioning? All of those can happen, one of the two of the three. So is your organization going to wait for that first trans person and try to walk through the process? It doesn't end well. They normally end up suing because their experience is so bad. So can you get ready as much as possible for that trans person before they are hired? Right? So there's a couple of things there. Human Rights Campaign, Corporate Equality Index, phenomenal tool to just look at different companies. And of course, in thinking about the impact of federal marriage equality. So for some organizations, and this is mainly like the large Fortune 500s, is that when federal marriage equality passed, then the standard just became marriage, which would be an unfair standard. You still need to have options for domestic partnership, right? And partnered folks, because that could be same sex and opposite sex. And we know that that impacts retirement, that impacts housing options, that impacts disability and insurance, right? And so the last question I have for you is, whom are you doing business with? When we're talking about LGBT, Black folks, Black History Month, it was just role modeled for you, thanks to Queen Dr. Danielle, right? That you all invested in let's check boxes, right? Black, female, LGBTQ owned business. I wasn't asked to do this intellectual giving and facilitation for free. So show people the money. I tell people, don't ask them to give of their lived experience for free. Those days are over. So can you say what percentage of your spending in your department or your unit or your whole organization is done with diverse suppliers? LGBTQ is just one, right? So we do have, certification, and it is through the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. But you've got all those others, DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, largely based on race, but not exclusive. You've got WBEs, Women-Owned Business, MBEs, Minority Business Enterprise. We've got Disability-Owned Business Enterprise, Service Disability Veteran-Owned Enterprise. All the things in common, it has to be 51% owned, controlled, and operated and managed by a person with membership in that disadvantaged group, right? And yes, we can, a different time, that certification has pros and cons. Yes, it can be expensive. And yes, if you think about it, as a Black queer woman, what certification should I go get? And I honestly looked at both of them. It was $500 for 1 year for the MBE. It was $250 per year for 2 years total for the NGLCC. Guess which one this sister did? And they treated me wonderfully, highlighted me on the website, promoted my business. I was on all the mixers. It was great, right? So just thinking about who you are doing your spend with, because that goes back into that community. Or we all know that with micro, small businesses, that investment in them is paying childcare or rent or car notes, right? Unlike going to a larger entity, may or may not. So I know I rushed through that at the end. Just a couple minutes for Q&A, so go.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I didn't see any pop up in the chat box. No questions?
Any feedback, energies, right? Let's not go real crazy Eurocentric and go all like formal, right? So energies, thoughts, reactions. No, I totally disagree with you, woman, right?
Well, if you,
I just want to thank you for your energy in the space. It's been awesome. From the minute you started talking until now, I think people are maybe just not able to collect themselves enough to speak back because they're so engaged in the communication. It's like you don't want to go next. I don't have that problem. So, so I do thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your energy in this space. I am interested to know what your side hustle business, Not Stevens College, is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. And I can give contact information. You know, I have a slide. So Dr. Queen Danielle, feel free to share that with everybody. But Voiceless Media LLC. So I do workshop facilitation, plenary moderation. So I create and moderate panels. I do keynote addresses. I do, workshops, normally not under 90 minutes normally, but workshops. And then I still do voiceover services for radio. So like I narrate audiobooks and I do like some online learning modules. So some of you might hear my voice somewhere of like, please turn to the next page, right? Like that stuff. But that's the growing, hopefully that's the retirement arm of my hustle, is that I'll be able to build a home studio and just get up every morning and do that. But yeah, really right now, the bread and butter is facilitation, like doing this where we have lots of workshops and we go in depth and we really create brave spaces to start unpacking the stuff that we got, right? I made allusion to the colonel who I caught whippings from. My mother is an English professor. And so literally my social programming was don't go off this army base and talk about sex, race, religion, sexual orientation, nothing. I grew up with he got too much sugar in his tea. I grew up with the absence of lesbians at all. Like I just had a conversation with them. Do you all realize that there was just a pure absence? Like I didn't see myself in any of your village. And the village they constructed around me is phenomenal. It is Black excellence. It is tons of military folks. It's great. But there was nobody that when I started developing these feelings and knowing I was different, that I could go and talk to. Right. And so part of my work now, and they still are like, you did what? You said what? You were in public talking about what? They're supportive, but they don't get it because that helped me get home every night. So I understand that training was for protection, but it doesn't serve me now at 44. My silence doesn't serve me. The forced code switching doesn't serve me anymore. So we've got to create spaces where we practice and talk about this stuff and work through it. Because if not, we're that person at the water cooler. We're the person nobody wants on their team. We're the person people talk about behind their back. We're the person who loses jobs and benefits because they're like, nah, that's the homophobe. That's the transphobe. Like, don't, right? They're talented, but no. So, even here at Stevens, I tell them I'm committed to making sure y'all come out with this degree and you're comfortable talking about DEI. You're comfortable doing my little corny worksheets about identity and trying to connect your identities to each other and talking about aspiring allyship. You have to be appointed. You can't self-anoint yourself an ally. You can't do one good deed and then put a pin on your collar and rock with that for the rest of your life. Like they're getting that first term freshman year from me of like, you got to be appointed. You keep showing up, that community will tell you you're an ally. And please go run to your own first, right? Whether that's white folks, you trying to be an aspiring ally, don't run to me. That's more emotional labor for me right now. I need you to go talk to other white folks, get really good. We'll find ways to collaborate. Same thing with LGBT folks, trans folks, you know, any of us in there is do your work, then go talk to other people, other cisgender people first before you run to the trans person. Showing up, not taking up space, but just showing up for the trans folks, they will let you know you're an ally, right? So it's just, so yeah, Boisterous is very passionate about creating those workshop experiences and getting in there and having these talks so we can get rid of this garbage. So thank you for asking.
Well, we're going to thank you. If anyone has additional questions that you want some dialogue with Shashawn, please inbox me. I'll make sure that that information gets to her. So, but for the sake of time, we want to make sure that we close out so you guys can get back to Zooming. But I want to thank you, Shashawn, for gracing us with your presence and knowledge today. My daughter always say to me after she's done something fabulous or just feeling super good about herself, she looks in the mirror and prime her hair a little bit and she runs her finger across her eyebrow and say, Mom, I'm a snack. So I'm gonna say to you today that you were a whole meal. I am absolutely full after this presentation, and on behalf of the resource group and our colleagues and friends and partners of the Division of Extension, we hope we can call upon you to continue to engage in meaningful dialogue. And I want to thank you to everyone who joined this live discussion today. As a reminder, Ms. Dow's full bio and recording of today's session can be found only on our SharePoint site. We hope that you have enjoyed yourself and would return next week as we introduce our second speaker and ally, who will be joining us from Prairie View A&M University, Dr. Mark Shapey, and he will be engaging us in a discussion entitled Unearthing and Understanding Microaggressions for Inclusion and Improved Communication. Registration is open and the link is in the chat box. We want to thank you guys again and go forward and embrace your community because they're waiting on you. Have an amazing afternoon.